You ready? Okay. Well, glad y'all could make it today. My name is Jeremy, and this is
Zach. I'm the plant records and person and taxonomist here at Juniper level.
and I head up the research and grounds. We're going to tell you about easy to grow trilliums, which makes our talk pretty easy because they're kind of all easy to grow. So we do, in fact, have one of the largest, if not the largest, collection of trilliums anywhere. And so we really like the plants. Both for me and Zach, it was the plant that got us into plants. So they're very close to our horticultural hearts, so to speak. So we're just going to show you around, show you a few trilliums that we know, even if you've never grown one ever, that in a typical shady garden situation you shouldn't have too much trouble with. So let's get started. This is a Trillium ludovicianum, which is from where natively?
Louisiana and Mississippi. Ludoviciana means basically from Louisiana.
Mm-hmm. So guess what? It's easy to grow. This is a single clone that we selected at some point, and you can see it's got a lot of shoots, so it is offsetting. Those little rhizomes are making more rhizomes. And so several Trillium, not all Trillium, but several Trillium will offset, which means that you get to share them with your friend or friends, and some do it more than others. Some just don't really want to ever offset, but in almost every case, Trilliums will produce seed, and we'll show you what seedlings look like as we walk through the gardens today. So Trillium ludovicianum, that is a species and part of a hybrid group that we do sell here. So we sell several easy to grow Trilliums here at the nursery. Let's get in some shade. Division of Trilliums is not difficult. So when you do have one of those easy to grow Trilliums and it's made a whole bunch of stems, the best time of year, I think you can divide them in the garden about any time of year, but the best time of year is actually right now. While the soil is still cool, while it's warming up, they seem to have the roots seem to be growing very actively this time of year. And so you dig them up, split them up. If you plan to share them with a friend or move them around, or you're going to eat lunch before you plant them, just have a bucket of water sitting there. Throw them right in the bucket of water. Do not let the roots dry out. That is an Achilles heel for them. But yeah, get all the roots that you can because they're shy to make new roots. Throw them in a bucket of water if there's any delay with transplanting. And when you do put them back in the ground, green side up preferably, water them in good, and that's about it. So as we walk through here, here's another ludovicianum. You can see this one just has this has been here a long time, doesn't have as many stems. Even within a single species, sometimes some representatives of a population will put a lot of offsets up, and some representatives of that population are more sparse in their offsetting. Zach, take us to another one.
And sometimes Trilliums just pop up in the garden from seed. That's the ludovicianum as well that just popped up. We missed the seed pod.
Yep.
Probably about 5 to 7 years ago, and it's still here and doesn't belong, but it's all right. It's pretty right now.
We keep track of each accession. Think of an accession plant as a plant with a social security number, essentially. And so what we had here is one that, like Zach said, it threw seed. We missed the seed pod because we actually go around and we collect every single seed pod from our Trillium in the garden so that we can maintain the integrity of clones, since they do not necessarily come true from seed, and so that we can propagate, germinate the seeds, grow them out to saleable size, and be able to ethically share Trillium with anybody who wants to buy one. And so that one, of course, it got away. Like Zach said, 5 to 7 years. And there it is. So we'll probably dig that up and get rid of it at some point.
Another really easy to grow, good offsetting Trillium is Trillium recurvatum, which is my nemesis plant because Jeremy grew up with it.
Yeah.
It's his first Trillium. I've never seen it in the wild.
Yep.
This is one from East Texas and Nacogdoches. We sell them as Arcadia strain generally. It is a very good clumping plant. Good luck digging it up without breaking the rhizome. They're very thin, maybe a pencil size, and they are very brittle. So even if you leave a piece of rhizome behind, it will send out offsets and will grow from just a tiny piece of rhizome.
Meaning that sometimes Trillium are even easier than you want them to be to grow. Often, we'll move clones around. We want to move this clone from here to here, and like Zach said, a piece gets left behind, and then we have to figure out what was there, what it is, and then make a decision on to get rid of it or to move it with the rest of it. And in our situation, in a normal garden, it's a reason to celebrate when something like this happens. You got seedlings over there popping up, beautiful. You got pieces getting left behind or proliferating because someone hit them with a shovel, and that's great. That's actually what you want in a normal garden.
It's a very widespread species in the Mississippi River drainage. It's from East Texas to Alabama, and there's like 2 populations in North Carolina and up into Illinois, Indiana, and the Midwest.
Up in central Illinois, where I used to hunt morel mushrooms. That was from my stomping grounds, and my dad would say when those Trillium recurvatum are opening, well, he didn't call them that, he just called them Trillium, that's when the morels are coming up. So same about here too. Go ahead.
You guys might not be able to answer this question, but can you use Trilliums as medicinal, or are they edible at all?
They are not edible. They're slightly toxic.
Okay.
There are some people use them for medicine, and there are some studies. Some of especially the Asian species that they've used in some medicines, and they've done some studies on them. But generally, they have compounds that are not so great to eat, which are good for medicine in a lot of
Yeah,
cases.
that's true.
So
It's future medicine, we'll put it that way then. Here's another one we call this, this is selected as a Trillium fetidissimum. It's not a typical looking fetidissimum, but Trillium fetidissimum, of all the Trilliums, if you're ever going to have a weed that's a Trillium, it would be that one, which again is fine. To have this as a weed all over the garden, you could only hope to be so lucky. And so here's a Trillium fetidissimum. Again, this is native from the same area as Trillium ludovicianum.
this is Louisiana and southern Mississippi, right along the Mississippi River on the levees. This one came from Baton Rouge, from a population that was rescued by Mark Rose and shared with us, where they built a giant development where this is, and we've probably sold 3,000 or 4,000 seedlings over the years from that population that we've grown in-house ethically.
Because the population, or representatives of the population, were rescued and then propagated, there are now more Trillium fetidissimum with the Baton Rouge genetics, basically that umbrella of genetics from that region. There are probably more out there in people's gardens than actually existed in the population before it was destroyed. And that's really what we're all about at the core, is ex situ conservation. We're going to conserve plants outside of their initial situation, and of course then we want to propagate those plants, starting with the rarest or most endangered type plants. Endangered meaning rare, but also endangered meaning there's bulldozers knocking at the door. So that always...
Or wild hogs.
Oh man,
Another problem in
wild hogs.
There have been populations that have been practically wiped out because of feral hogs in the southeast.
So what is the local Trillium called around this area, though, along like creek beds, or right around the creeks and rivers that grow along like the trees and stuff.
We've got two around here, right?
Where around here?
Around the Charlotte.
Ah.
Okay, that's Trillium cuneatum.
Okay.
It's a pretty common. It doesn't make it into Raleigh
Okay.
natively.
Gotcha.
It stops like Guilford, Randolph,
Gotcha.
and the UREs in like Montgomery and Moore counties, but it is further west.
Okay.
It's really common. Smells great.
Oh,
Smells like juicy fruit,
Yep, yep.
bubblegum.
Yep.
That was my
That's the
first
one.
Trillium.
Okay.
Yep.
And it's one that was my gateway plant in 1995, 96.
Okay. Do those propagate really
Yeah,
well?
yeah. They you can grow them from seeds.
Yep.
Some offset.
Okay.
That one generally doesn't offset as frequently as some of these others, but we have found offsetting clones.
Yep. Yep. That's something we're always looking for when we're looking to represent new populations here at Juniper Level Botanic Garden, is that when we can find one that's offsetting in situ, in its natural situation, we can feel pretty confident that it's going to continue that trait in cultivation. Therefore, we can share it more quickly. And but yeah, it generally don't offset as quickly, so we'll depend more on seed for that. All right, we'll just look at some more cool ones. You can see a bunch over there, just hanging out. The clones we've selected, occasionally we'll accession a clone just seeded in, more rarely. Here's another, this is a really pretty clone. This is rare. It's rare that a Trillium in nature goes solid silver like this, but sometimes it happens. And when it does, we hope that we can have it to represent in our garden. But you can see that this is offsetting very well. It's in a little bit more light than some other Trillium. We have found that some Trillium, not all, but some, seem to offset much more vigorously with more sun. The trade-off is that they need to be moist in the full sun, or mostly full sun. If they dry out too much, then they will they don't like that. They don't want to dry out and be in the sun. They're somewhat drought tolerant. Most species are somewhat drought tolerant in shade as long as they have moisture this time of year when they're really growing, and that the soil never completely dries out. All right.
So you guys were talking about the smell. Does each of the different variations have a different smell to them? Okay.
They
So
do.
fetidissimum is, as the name implies,
Fetid, yeah.
it's not a good smell. It's sort of poop smell.
Poop smell, yes.
But within the cuneatum, like near Charlotte, that species right now, as it's treated, is a complex of probably about a dozen, 6 to 12 species. The stuff in Georgia and Alabama, there are 2 or 3 taxa in there as well that don't smell like that. And we're probably going to have to reassign a type for that cuneatum, or it needs to have a name change because of where it was selected.
It's still all easy to grow, but yeah, some smell like juicy fruit and some just smell like more chemically. There's lemon pledge, which is Trillium luteum, right?
Yeah, and then there's Trillium delicatum, which smells like horse manure.
Horse poo, yeah. Yeah. Yep.
Yeah, but
So-
I mean, it's to attract small flies. We're finding that it's fungus gnats pollinate them, and freeloader flies, which are these little, and dancing flies are the major pollinators. And insects are much better taxonomists than we are, because they know this one's different than that. And if you pay attention to what the same insects are pollinating one thing rather than the other. So they're really great at figuring that out.
So again, more and more, there's another seedling there. Hopefully, Zach, we can find a cotyledon leaf.
There's a younger seedling that's still probably 3 to 4 years old at that stage.
Yeah, they're very slow. So, you know, Trilliums are just absolutely beautiful. So why don't you see them sold at all the garden centers? And that's simply because they're very slow. Once they plane out, like a boat finally hits that critical speed where it planes out on the waves, they're just fine. They offset or they set a lot of seed, but it takes really no less than 4 years from seed, and really 5 years more commonly, to produce a flowering sized trillium from seed. They don't store that well as bare root plants. So if you're going to bare root a bunch and then ship them as like you would a lily bulb, or a tulip bulb or a daffodil bulb, you just can't do it the same way. They don't deal with that. I'd mentioned earlier, you can't let their roots dry out, and they're shy to make new roots. And so if the roots are really damaged or they start rotting back, that seems to continue right into the rhizome. So they're kind of a labor of love, but we probably propagate more Trillium than anyone else. Right now we have tens of thousands of seedlings growing from seed to get to flowering size that we can share with people, and that we can study and learn from and see what new hybrids come out of it, that sort of thing. But it's all we can ever do is maybe break even. We don't really expect to make a lot of money on it, and that's why a lot of other nurseries aren't really playing that game. They're truly a beautiful plant that until we can figure out how to speed up the process, there won't be that many nurseries selling them.
Because the little bags of Trilliums you can buy
boy.
at Lowe's or Home Depot, bags of peat that you can get for $4 to $5. Those Trilliums came out of the wild,
Most
somewhere in the
likely.
mountains.
Mm-hmm.
They probably have no roots. Their buds are probably damaged, and they're probably not going to grow. And you may as well just throw the $5 in the ground, because it's not going to be worth anything.
And that's a good point. We're talking about easy to grow Trilliums. Well, the hard to grow Trilliums here in this region are the ones from higher elevations. And Trilliums are extremely common in many of the mountains, the Appalachians, of course, Trillium, luteum, and cuneatum, and a lot of the pedicellate species where their flowers on a pedestal that hangs down. Very, very common up in the higher elevations. They're very difficult to grow here in lower elevations. And often the poached Trilliums that are laundered somewhere and then put in bags and sold, even if they were a healthy plant to start with, it's unlikely, it's less likely that they would do well here at this lower elevation. So that's something that we can always vouch for here, is that the Trilliums that we sell are seed grown or ethically propagated or acquired. And that's very important to us. Just as important as sharing is to make sure that we're being good stewards of this amazing group of plants.
Is Trillium considered endangered, or is it illegal to dig them up from, like, if we have land behind our house, is it illegal to dig them up and transplant them somewhere?
It depends on the state and the
Yeah.
species.
Yeah.
There's one species of Trillium that's on the Endangered Species Act. It was only known from a couple of populations. It was described in 75. Since that time, it's actually very common from North Augusta, South Carolina, all the way across Georgia into eastern Alabama, in this band of the correct habitat. But there are laws. Some states, they're all protected, whether it's grandiflorum, which occurs by the hundreds of thousands in each population. It depends on your state jurisdiction. A lot of the native plant groups will do rescues on sites that are going to be destroyed. We've got a bunch of Trillium luteum in the garden from a place in Georgia that Tony went in 2010 or 2011, somewhere in there. It's this mountain near a car dealership, and they were going to clear the mountain, and it's absolutely carpeted with Trillium luteum. And he went with some of the native plant groups there in Georgia and collected some for the garden from that as a rescue.
Generally, Trilliums are protected from botanists and gardeners, but they're not protected from development. And that's true with a lot of great native plants, is that You know, if you got a building permit, it really doesn't matter anymore. You just bulldoze them, and that's often the case. And that's why it's so important that botany exists, and that we continue to teach that, and that people have an eye for that, and that can organize groups of people who can go in and rescue these plants. It's got to, more than ever. I mean, it's unbelievable how many sites that we've been able to see and enjoy, really in the 10 years that he and I have been in the field looking for Trillium, that are gone now. I mean, they're just gone. Forestry, but not just forestry, but subdivisions and Walmart parking lots, and
not just Trillium sites, but swamps of taxodium, of bald cypress, with a ground cover of southern shield fern and these giant Dryopteris that they're by the thousands that are waist high. You can smell the ferns that we visited in March, and by November it was clear cut and nothing was left of this really cool site that we visited.
And so it's the real protection at this point needs to be by landowners or people who are willing to drive around and contact landowners and for this great, easy to grow plant. And oftentimes where Trilliums grow, that's also an indicator of a botanically diverse ecosystem. Even if it's been destroyed before, it's rare that you just find cool Trilliums. Usually there's a lot of other cool native plants there as well. And that's why, again, we keep mentioning the term gateway plant. It's a gateway plant because we fell in love with Trillium, and then, oh look, what's that? Let's find out, what's that? And they're all right there together. And then it's too late to go back. We're true believers at that point, and then you got everything else, and then it's a lifetime obsession. So
things like bloodroot
and
trout lilies and rue anemone, bulletrum, and just all these little ephemerals, spring beauties. They're all things, and wild gingers. They're things that we encounter when we're looking for these things, and it just gives you an appreciation for the habitats where these things are.
That's the next step. You know, it's one thing to grow things in a garden, but to be able to see them in nature and to see how you've just got this living fabric of how everything ties together, not just the Trillium, but all these other species and genera that Zach mentioned, and then just the lay of the land, the rocks, the soil, and everything's connected in nature. And I'll never be able to get to the bottom of that in my whole life. But Trilliums are a good start, and they are easy to grow. So again, real quick, in a garden situation, moist soil. We've got raised beds that we keep irrigated. This time of year, they're going to be just fine for water. You can push the season a little further as they decline and go dormant. Once they dry out, then they will go dormant. So if you can keep them up for another month or so, they're more likely to offset and get bigger every year. Again, to share with a friend, don't let the roots dry out. In June, late June, early July, I should mention seed production. Late June, early July, by then it'll have a little seed pod right on the top. Or if it's a pedicellate type, it'll be kind of down underneath the leaf. What'll happen, it looks like that seed pod is going to crack open from the top. It never will. The seed pod never cracks open at the top, it cracks just a little at the base. Those seed have something on them called an eliosome, which is like crack to ants and yellow jackets specifically. That is the dispersal mechanism. The ants they'll go in there and they'll grab a seed and they'll carry it off, and often they eventually just give up or completely become exhausted because the seed's much bigger than they are, and they'll drop it along the way to their nest, and that's where it germinates. The yellow jackets, and I remember this when I used to plant these things, we used to open sow Trillium seed, and we know that we don't have to do that now. But the yellow jackets, as soon as I planted the seed, they'd swoop down and they would get real low like this, and they put all 6 legs under that thing, and then they would take off, and it was like they were way overloaded. It's like a FedEx plane or something. It's way overloaded, and they could barely take off, and they might move it a mile or more before they finally drop it. And they're after that little sticky goober that's on each seed called an eliosome, which I think in Latin means oil body, right?
It's a fat and sugar attached bit of non-viable, non-required tissue on each seed.
Yeah.
That the ants, and it's tasty. It's got all these, you know, proteins and fats, and it's like crack.
Yeah, it's very addictive.
It's
They
very
have to have it.
addicting.
Yeah, it's if they want it, they got to work for it too, and that's what disperses the seed. I think actually the bloodroot has a
Bloodroot
somewhat
has it,
similar.
and trout lilies, all these spring ephemerals, they want to encourage their seeds to not dry out. So they put these out, then the animals find them, they hurriedly take them down underground, they'll eat the fat, and then they'll throw the seed away.
Yeah, they don't need that.
Usually it's in their little midden, so it's under soil and in moist, and then it germinates the next year. So it's a win-win for the ant and the plant.
That's right. Yeah.
So once we see the critters, then we try and get hold of the
You want to try to beat the critters.
Yeah. And it happens fast. Once it cracks, you know, it's just it ripens and everything's ready. The sugars are more available to them. Everything softens up, and it happens fast. They'll clean that seed pod out in a couple days. But if you don't get them, you know, you got triple shred or you got leaf mulch, whatever you got in your garden, you know, those seeds will fall in there, and they'll germinate in a year or so. And we're looking for some cotyledon leaves, but it's a little elongated lance-shaped leaf. And that's all it does the first year. You don't see a pattern, even if its parent had a pattern on the leaf. It's only narrow. It's maybe a 1/4 inch wide by 1 inch long. That's all it does its entire first year. The longer you can keep that cotyledon leaf up by keeping it moist, the better start that it can have the next year. Year 2, you'll get what's called a spoon leaf. And a spoon leaf is a single leaf shaped like it says, like a spoon. Okay, there's a spoon leaf over here that Zach's pointing to. That's a 2-year-old.
2-year-old, you can start to see there's a little bit of pattern.
And that's all it'll do year 2. That's it. It doesn't put up more than 1 leaf successionally in a year. The buds might emerge at different, you know, a few weeks apart, but after that it doesn't put up new leaves. It doesn't develop a new leaf bud and put up a new leaf.
So I could be walking in the woods and be walking past 5 or 10 trilliums and not even notice it's a trillium with all the small ones.
That's right. That's what it does, and that can happen too. Not just a 2-year-old leaf, but perhaps if the deer browse is severe, or there was a lot of drought for several years in a row, they can go backwards and regress into that state where they're not even a whorl, the 3 leaflets on the top, and they'll just go backwards like that. But as far as seed goes, you know, unless you have some reason, it's fine to just let them fall and enjoy the fact. Look for the seedlings in the spring, protect them. And I would say starting in year 2, when they're a spoon leaf like that, they're quite easy to move. Just like I said, with the big mature patch, you can split them up, break those rhizomes, put them right back in the ground. But even as a spoon leaf, you can easily move them. Same rules apply. So again, very, very easy to grow. Once you've got them, you've got them.
So I have a question. I purchased some last spring,
Yeah.
planted them, and I haven't seen mine come up yet.
Which ones did you get?
Don't recall. I probably have the tag.
Okay.
Yeah.
Most of them are up now, but there are some
Where
species
do
that are
you
late.
live?
Franklinton.
It's a little cooler up there, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I've still got some species that are just now starting to come up. We're having a very early spring. We're about 3 weeks ahead right now. Some of these things were not blooming last year at this time. They're 3 weeks ahead.
Email our customer service. We'd be happy to help you
Okay.
figure out how they're doing and which ones and when to expect them to come up.
Okay.
Okay.
Yeah, I have all of their still.
Good,
sitting
good.
out
And
there.
we keep the
It's coming up.
we keep the customer records here too, so we can customer service can look that up and help you with that.
Fair warning, voles absolutely love
Oh, yeah.
trilliums,
Yeah,
so they will eat them.
yeah. Voles can be an
So,
issue. So
Would that be
So will deer.
yeah.
when I went out and I saw like a bunch of little holes all around in my patch where I have like my trilliums and my hellebores? Is that what that is?
Well, the Trilliums you might change the tents to had, but they don't mess with, they don't generally mess with the hellebores.
Yeah,
So
the hellebores are coming out.
we've had, yes, the voles they eat about anything except, well, hellebores, but yeah, they'll attack Trillium. So if you've got a vole issue, in order to defend against that in the future, grab a product called Permatil. You can buy it by the bag if you just need a little, and plant those Trilliums in, I would say 60 to 70% Permatil down, just encase that rhizome in it. And the roots will grow out where they grow, and the vole might eat a little root, but they're not going to get to the real nutrient storage structure, the rhizome.
What is that again? What's it called?
Permatil. Permatil, we use it.
So how do you know if you have voles? Like really, like how?
What they'll do is they'll generally eat your most expensive plants first. So start there.
They know that the label says it came from here.
Yeah, yeah,
Or some other places that are not so great. Or if it's a plant that you paid a lot for.
yeah.
Or if it's a plant you really like.
Yeah.
That's what they usually
Yeah.
go for.
Go to a big box store and go to their clearance section, buy some of those plants. Get those tags, might be a buck or two, and switch out the tags. Put the buck or two tags on your expensive plants, and the voles will leave them alone most likely. I'm a very objective person, but there's something to that. You'd mentioned, what is Permatil? Someone asked. Permatil is an expanded slate or shale, something like that. Basically, they mine it, and it's mined fairly locally in central North Carolina. And then they hit it with some heat, and it pops. And so it's like little mini lava rocks. And voles, they break their teeth on it. And when there's enough of it in the soil, their tunnels start to collapse. It doesn't pack. And that's really the key. It's not a chemical repellent. It's simply the soil structure doesn't suit their needs as voles. And so we use a lot of that here, not as much for vole protection because we do monitor for voles, but for perfect drainage in plants that aren't easy to grow like Trillium. So,
Would voles have eaten my bleeding heart as well?
probably. Yeah.
Thanks for the information. I've got it.
You're very welcome. Thank you. All right.
Okay. Thank you.
You can grow Trilliums in a pot.
Yeah.
A larger pot would be better. They want to stay moist through the summer. They can dry out a little bit, especially if the pot is sheltered and shaded, and if it's in contact with the ground, they can root out of the pot into the soil, and they're actually pretty easy to grow in pots.
Yeah. Yeah, it does. Zach mentioned, being in contact not just with the ground but with the soil. So if the pot's sitting on the ground, the fact that there's the air conditioning or the soil temperature moderation. So when a pot is suspended above the ground, I don't think Trillium roots like to be that hot. I think that ambient temperature is difficult for them, but it's still possible. But if it's on the ground, then there's always a cooler place for those roots to grow in response to, not towards, but more or less allows the roots to continue growing, and that helps a lot. Yeah, you're welcome. All right.
Thank you.
Thank you.